So, in this session we are going to continue looking at some more tools available in Kali Linux for doing the server side attacks. So, we have been seeing a few of the tools till now which could potentially be used for different types of attacks on the servers targets that has been identified as part of reconnaissance. So, just a general note, like any other tool or any other application, we would like to stress here that one needs to basically get complete hands on feeling of each of the tools that we are really looking at a very brief level as part of these sessions, because unless and until we really try to have those tools installed and played around with, it will be a little bit difficult for us to really appreciate the kind of power or the depth that each of the tools actually provides us with different kinds of features. So, as they say, practice makes a man perfect. We need to make sure that the tools that are being talked about are used as as a sample reference, and then along with the tools that we are looking at, all other tools, related tools that we can also come out by doing our own study is all tried out and then attempted to understand basically what kind of features that it provides in terms of meeting our objectives of doing a very successful penetration testing. So, we would like to request all the viewers to ensure that those tools that we are getting discussed are all tried out in a hands on manner by each of you, so that you can really get a bigger comfort feeling of how those tools work, what kind of features it is providing, and how it could be used for doing a penetration testing successfully on a identified target systems. So, one of the things that could potentially be made use of is a mail system for exploitation. So, as we know, email servers basically have details about what are the different mail accounts that are there and how the email server is actually configured. Using this information, the person doing the penetration testing could potentially try to make this as an entry point if at all it is considered as a very high priority target. Although the protocol, the SMTP protocol that is predominantly used for the mail servers all through the internet, the earlier versions of it actually had lot of loopholes. The good news is that most of the later versions have actually got most of these vulnerabilities addressed very smartly. Email systems in most of the times what we will see is that they are not sort of dedicated just for email alone, but you also would potentially have different type of web applications that are actually used, installed and used on the same system, which would be actually accessed over a web interface from the internet. So, because of this particular fact, it basically opens up a bigger possibility of having more vulnerabilities on that same system, which could potentially be made use of as an attack by the attacker as an entry point for him to basically jump to other internal systems of that same network in which the system is present. How does one actually try to attack a mail server? So, if you recall, in the reconnaissance method we basically had looked at different tools with which we will be able to find out more details about what are all the different servers that is actually configured in a DNS system, right. So, the fears was basically the Kali Linux tool that we had actually looked at, and one of the subdomains which will typically be there in any domain registration will be the corresponding mail server registration, right. So, with the MX record of the DNS corresponding to the mail server. So, if you have, for example, google.com, we all know that there is something called as mail.google.com, right. So, likewise using the fears tool that is actually available in Kali Linux, we saw how the different subdomains within a particular registered domain could actually be found out, and mail server will be one of those domains typically, right. So, one of the main reasons why attacker would want to basically exploit a mail server is to sort of spoof emails as if the mails have actually got generated from some other person, right. So, one of the things that we could actually make use of is a tool called a Netcat. So, Netcat is basically a computer networking service that basically helps one in trying to read and write TCP or UDP connections, right. So, we already know what is a TCP or UDP connection from our previous IS3. So, Netcat could actually be used to design a very dependable application on top of it, with which we would be able to do a read and write on either a TCP or a UDP based connection, right. So, if you for example say netcat mail.secmob.net and follow it by the port number. So, port number 25, as most of us would know, is a well known port that is typically used by my SMTP mail servers across. So, that is actually the default well known port number that is actually used for the mail server. So, once we connect to the server using netcat, we could actually make use of the hello command to tell the server who we are, right. So, after that I could basically go ahead and try to use a mail from receipt to and all these things, which is basically what typically an email client would actually do after getting all these details from the user, right. So, when we actually type a mail, compose a mail saying the to field is whatever is the to address to which we want to send the mail, that particular email address is actually marked as an argument to the receipt to SMTP mail server command. So, with all these SMTP commands that I could actually find out from the SMTP RFC, I could actually generate a email automatically using this kind of an application like netcat, and I could basically send an email as if it has originated from somebody, and also could use potentially the reply to field differently, so that when that particular email is getting replied, without the person possibly realizing that it is actually getting generated, the reply is getting generated to another email address, the reply mail will actually come to another email address that is actually getting marked as the reply to address of this new composed mail. Coming down into the last part of a server side attacks, we are now going to start looking at what is called as a brute force attack. So, brute force attack is basically when I try to, as an attacker, try to find out in brute force manner maybe the user IDs or the passwords or the keys or whatever it is that would help me to successfully get myself authenticated into that particular targeted system, right. Going by the nature, as we can very easily understand, all kinds of brute force testings are very computationally intensive, meaning that it will actually take a lot of time and lot of resources for the attacker to basically have the brute force testing completed successfully to its full completion level, right. So, for this particular reason, you will always find that the administrators of your servers or your network portals, whatever it is, basically advise you to actually have a very long password, because the longer the password or longer the key, if a potential attacker is actually trying to employ the brute force mechanism, it is going to take him that much long period of time for him to successfully get what is the password or the username or the key that he is actually trying to get. The shorter the password length, the quicker will he be able to get the key or the password, and the longer the length, we can very naturally imagine how difficult it will be for him in terms of the amount of time that he has to wait before he is even possibly successful in getting the key or the password, right. So, in addition, the bigger the key, it is going to take more time for the attacker to basically get access to the key, by which time we can hope that the alerts basically start getting triggered off for the administrator to realize that some kind of brute force attack is possibly getting initiated and is possibly in progress right now on that system, after which the administrator can take some quick termination actions, right. So, always it is a best practice from a defense mechanism to have a very big password and not really have it as part of something like a dictionary password string, something which is right away available from a dictionary or the username itself and so on and so forth, right. So, Hydra is basically a tool that is actually available for doing different types of brute force attacks. So, it is typically used for attacking an email system, because Hydra can take an IP address as a target, and it could also try to break in the administrator account for a POP3 or an SMTP protocols used by the email system. So, right. So, what kind of information should be available for Hydra? We need the target's IP address. We need what are the open ports, so whether it is a port number 80 or 443 or 25 or whatever is the open port, and what is the protocol that is actually going to be used. So, whether we are going to just use HTTP or whether we are going to use SMTP and so on, and also what is a typical username that has got to be used. So, for example, it could be admin or administrator or whatever it is. So, these kind of details are required for this particular tool, which could potentially be part of my output from my reconnaissance step, right. So, on that particular mail system. So, for the Hydra to work, we actually need a Firefox plugin tool called Tamper Data. So, this is something which is actually downloadable and installable within Firefox as an Firefox add-on, and it is also a very popular tool that we could actually easily install, right. So, Tamper Data is basically a tool written by Adam Judson that basically helps an attacker to sort of get details from a get or a post method of a HTTP protocol, right. So, as some of us know, the get and the post method of an HTTP protocol is typically used for getting the form, getting the page details or taking input details from the form and then posting it onto the remote server. So, the details that is actually available as part of this Tamper Data plugin will be used by a tool like Hydra for it to essentially reduce the kind of complexity and the type of effort that is typically required for doing a very long fetched brute force attack. The inputs that is actually provided by the Tamper Data will be used for generating the different username and password combinations into the Hydra tool. So, this is basically how we actually make use of the Tamper Data. So, before we actually have the username and password typed in, we enable the Tamper Data plugin and then sort of accept and say OK for the tamper to be enabled. So, once that is done, we actually have a pop-up on displayed on the screen whenever there is a username and password that is entered, and there is a potential username password that will be actually getting printed here that has been recognized as part of this plugin of Tamper Data, right. So, once this is done, it basically becomes very easy for a tool like Hydra to actually work in. So, now where is this Hydra tool available is that it could actually, you could actually go under the password attacks menu in Kali Linux applications menu option, and then go inside the online attacks and select Hydra, which is listed as one of the tools that is there as part of that sub menu. So, once we select this particular sub menu option, it opens up a terminal window, and we have details about the possible ways by which the Hydra tool could actually be used as part of the welcome screen. So, I could actually either use it in one form if I basically if I basically want to have SMTP as a protocol, by which I just say Hydra and I give the administrator password name, and then I give the possible password text files, right. So, this name I basically get it from a Tamper Data plugin, and then whatever are the possible password that is there as part of my dictionary, I actually have it put in a particular file and then give this as an argument to the -p option when I invoke Hydra in the command line, right. And then I specify the IP address, and then I also specify what protocol here. So, if I am basically trying to have SMTP as a protocol, so I could actually specify SMTP here, and then this particular tool will actually start the brute force testing method of trying to identify every password that is actually mentioned in the given file for that particular username admin on that SMTP server of 1.1 192.168.1.1. Similarly, I could also use it as a web form in this manner, by which I could basically specify the URL in this particular string and then give that for starting Hydra. Now, another brute force tool that is actually available is what is called as a Dar Buster. So, Dar Buster is basically a tool that will help the attacker to find out the entire directory structure, right, and the possible list of file names in the subdirectory tree, right. In a typical web application server, we would find that from the URL field you could find that there is a huge sometimes the URL is actually very large, and the large part of the URL will basically also give us an idea on what is the entire directory tree that is actually available as part of this particular web server, right. So, applications and pages could potentially be hidden within the server. So, this particular tool called Dar Buster is basically designed designed to sort of unhide all those hidden applications and web pages that an attacker would possibly need as part of his testing effort, right. So, this particular tool will be available under web applications menu in the sub menu of web crawlers. So, Dar Buster tool will be actually listed as part of the web crawlers sub menu. So, once this particular tool is opened, there are different fields that it has actually got to be entered in the menu option. So, first and foremost is what is the URL that needs to be targeted, and you could also specify a file which will typically contain the list of file or the directory names that it has to be searched with inside this particular web server, right. So, once you give this particular URL and we also specify this name, you could basically start it with the scanning effort to find out which among the strings in this particular given input file is actually available as part of the entire directory tree of this web server, right. There also have a number of threads that is there. So, you could possibly have maximum of 100 threads, that is basically what our recommendation would be, or select even lesser number of threads depending on the hardware configuration of your particular system and how much of memory space you would really have, right. So, once you give these input parameters and then say start, the tool basically starts running, and then it basically gives you the different kinds of subdirectories that it is actually found in this particular website. So, in this particular website on port number 80, it basically tells that it is actually having so many different subdirectories that it is found, and the moment you want to have specific details on a single subdirectory that it has already found out, you could actually potentially press the stop button and then press the field of the directory, what directory to start with as this particular directory that you are requiring. So, if you have already, the tool has already reported that CGI bin is a directory in which is actually available as a subdirectory in that particular web server. So, you could actually specify CGI bin as the directory to start with in this particular menu option in the main dashboard, and also if you have a very specific requirement of only trying to find out some specific files with the particular extension, you could also populate it in the next text box that is there. So, you want to, for example, find only PHP files or IMG files or whatever it is, the attacker could basically place that text in this particular field and then say start for it to basically have that particular scan started specifically in the selected directory, right. So, if you had selected CGI bin, now the output will only contain things that is actually been found out as part of subdirectories or files under the CGI bin directory alone. So, that is basically what you will find in the output that is presented as part of the tool output. So, the tool also basically gives you a report on, so if you click on the report button that is there in the tool, like the start button and everything, it basically generates a report of the findings that has been done till now. So, it tells you how many DARs have been found, how many files have been found, and what DARs has been found with what different HTTP responses like a 503 response or a 404 response and so on. So, if you for example know that you have got a 404 response, you would know that that particular folder name is actually not available as part of this particular directory tree of this URL, right. So, that way this report basically gives you a mechanism to get more details about this particular portal. Thank you.